7 and 8 together. I'm probably not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the woman caught in adultery. We talked about it during the sermon today, but I did want to make a point. He didn't mention this, and get your Bibles out. Look at 7. Go to 7, I think 50. Start at the end of chapter 7, and then where's John chapter 8, where he talks about the woman, the adulterous woman. As many people believe, and your Bible is probably like mine, it says the earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 and 8:11 through 8:11 in their Bibles. I mean, it's not in there. So there's a lot of theories about why that is. I'll give you some of them that I've read about. Is one, they didn't want this in there. The Jewish people did not want this in there because, I mean, it talks about somebody caught in sin and their idea of what should happen to somebody caught in sin. It goes completely against that. Jesus was talking about giving grace to this woman who'd been caught in sin, and told her to go, sin no more. But that's one theory, is they left it out on purpose. They don't necessarily believe that John wrote this. All right, does that kind of shock you guys a little bit, that John maybe didn't even write this section of the book? That maybe Luke or Mark wrote it and inserted it because he thought it was a good place for it to go into the canon, into the Bible. And then I heard one guy, which is this kind of the wildest one, is that because when they were writing these scriptures, they wrote them out on parchment, and when they were writing Luke, they ran out of parchment, and there was a spot here at the end of John's parchment, so they just wrote it there. And I don't believe that, but that's one of the theories I've heard, so we don't really know exactly why this wasn't in there. But the other reason for saying this is not necessarily wasn't in the original manuscript is because when you read it and you get to 53 and then go to 8:12, the story kind of just continues. 53, they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Look into it, and you will find that a prophet does not come from Galilee." And then in verse 12, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he says, "I am the light." So it almost seems like the story that John wrote went from 52 to 8:12, and he keeps going with that temptation. It's something to think about. When you come across something like that, what's your response to it? What's your response to it? Does it make you lose faith in the Bible?
It's a man thing.
Yeah.
The guys that were getting the canon together. I mean, there's stuff that didn't make the cut that probably, in my opinion, needs to probably has some validity.
Yeah.
This made the cut for some reason.
Yeah.
Why? Is this in the Eastern Orthodox Bible? Does anybody know?
I read some stuff like that. I think it is. I think it's in the first appeared in the Western Orthodox.
Well, the Eastern Orthodox is more hardcore.
Yeah.
It's their way.
Yeah.
They're even worse than Old Church of Christ.
But it started there, and then it gradually became everywhere. It was inserted in there. So I guess I'm thinking more of like how I grew up reading the Bible.
Yeah, but you probably grew up reading King James Version too.
Yeah.
Well, it was in there too.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I'm just saying,
I think I know what you're asking, but is different versions, the different transcripts that come out, do we say that this was wrong, this was right, because people interpret it different,
Mhm.
or, you know, I mean,
It goes to me, it goes to how do you read the Bible?
right.
I mean, think about that though. I mean, the way I read it growing up was, man, it was almost like a legal document. And you read every verse knowing that there was an exact meaning for everything that was in there. And it was absolutely accurate. The way it was the way it was translated was absolutely accurate and all that. And so as I started coming to church here, Bel Air, all those years ago, and people a lot smarter than me started teaching me in class things that I didn't know, right? What was I supposed to do with that? How did that affect my faith? My faith in Jesus. How did it affect me? When I figured out that maybe there's some things in here that I don't know, and maybe I might have not understood it correctly, or there's some things about it that I didn't even pay any attention to. If somebody hadn't told me that this section of scripture was like inserted right in the middle of this, I wouldn't have even thought twice about it. I didn't think twice about it. It was just part of it. So I guess my reason why I'm asking this question is just kind of, how does it affect your faith? When you come up on something like this that you didn't really expect, didn't really think about. Yes, Jim?
The way this thing says is, some of the earlier manuscripts don't have this section. The way these manuscripts got here was, that's all they had was to write it down, right?
Right.
And they were used.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were well used, they were copied
Yep.
many times.
Yep.
And many times. Those oldest ones, guess what? They weren't used as much because they weren't copied.
Yeah. Well, but
That's
if
my thoughts on it.
if you knew the oldest one didn't have it in there, then why is it in my Bible today?
Like I said, the ones that were copied, the ones that were used the most, that were the used ones, the good ones, the best ones,
Yeah.
had it in there. They're not the oldest ones because they were wore out. Those old ones were worn out.
Hmm.
They're not available anymore. They had to be copied.
Yeah.
So I trust God that he had a lot of influence in what we have today. My studying of how we got the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
they had a lot of scholars involved in that from all walks of life, looking at all kinds of manuscripts,
Yeah.
and the ones that seemed to be consistent were included in what we have today as part of the canon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think God played a big part in that. And so when I read, I think what was interesting, a couple things interesting to me is you brought up at the beginning of this study about how John probably didn't just sit down and write the
Sure.
entire book of John in one setting.
Right.
And there's a lot of other evidence to that fact. And so John felt like, through the inspiration, he put things together that having looked at the other epistles and the other writings, and what were some things that were missing, and, but when I read through John, I can kind of see where this fits, because he is the light of the world, and part of that light is grace and mercy. And so there is a separation from the time when they're in the wilderness, and then it's like a break, right? He's in the wilderness, now he goes into the temple, and now he's doing what he normally does. He goes in the temple, teaches, and these leaders are always looking for an opportunity when he's teaching to try to baffle him. And so you had this thing that goes against their lawful understanding of Scripture. And he provides even further evidence of who he is, as he even talks about himself as the light of the world in the follow-on passages.
Yeah.
So that's,
Okay.
that's kind of how I read it.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this verse doesn't, this scripture doesn't belong in our Bibles. I'm thinking about our heritage, my heritage, and how I've read the Bible all those years. And then you come upon something like this, and you know, we say we want to be like the first century church, right? Or we want to go all the way back to the church that Jesus built or formed. And then you read something like this and say, well, the first Bible that was written didn't even have this in there. It kind of does something to you, to me. Yeah.
Okay, so Gerald, I look at this, and first of all, it is notable because it does seem to be out of place.
Mhm.
So it kind of forces me to examine it closer.
Yep.
But then as I read what's there, there's nothing in that story that surprises me based on what I read elsewhere. Jesus is not doing something different here than what he's done elsewhere. So I don't think it's changing the nature of Jesus, and I don't think it's even adding a particular point, and this is the only place it's there in the Bible. So, okay, don't know how it got there, don't know why. There's also nothing in there that I can take and build on to take a diversion from the story of Jesus as taught elsewhere and say, well, the rest of it's wrong because this is what I read here. It's not there.
Right.
So it's almost like, I can picture John as he's writing, you know, it takes a while to write, especially when you're doing it like that. And like I said, maybe he's seen some of the other letters and he said, look guys, you forgot this story, and this is on my mind, so he writes it down. And then as he reads through the rest of the first part of the letter, he says, okay, this is where I was. And he just jumps and goes back to the thought he had before. So I can picture that happening in my mind, but I'm not concerned about that one story because it's reinforcing what I'm seeing elsewhere.
Mhm.
It's not a divergence from anything that I've seen in the rest of the books or even John's book.
Right. Yeah. So I think y'all maybe, I agree with what you said, Bob. That's 100% accurate. I think it fits with the message of Jesus. I agree with all that. I'm more just talking about my attitude about reading the Bible and how I approach it. So we've got to look at it and realizing that, you know, there's a lot of things we don't know, and our faith, foundation of our faith is not in the actual accuracy of how this was put together and all these things. Our faith is in Jesus alone. And we read the Bible to learn about him, learn to love him, learn about his attitude, his wishes, his, you know, what he wants from us. All those things are in there, but it's not a legal document that I have to interpret every word and make sure it's exactly right. Does that make sense? All right, chapter 7.
Then it also goes back to what we were just saying with this, the way he wrote it and such. These were not scholars who were used to writing letters to other people.
Yeah.
These were fishermen, tax collector. These were normal people of that
Are
day.
you hot now?
They didn't use outlines. They weren't going to get graded by the English teacher. They hadn't been sitting in class. They weren't trying to convince people on their social media.
Right.
They were just writing it as they went. The conditions they were doing this in were tough, and they were doing it all from memory, and they were trying to make sure they got it right. So
Yeah.
it goes back to what you said. This story's inserted in a weird place.
Yeah.
Okay, given their circumstances, that's okay.
Well, it produces a great message of encouragement for us.
Yes, it does.
So what do we learn from this, from that story of the adulterous woman? What message did you get from it? What did you learn about Jesus?
He didn't condemn, but encouraged her to go on with her life
Right.
in revelation of God.
Right.
So he was encouraging her.
He was encouraging her not to sin. He knew the hearts of those that brought her before him. And he challenged them, you know, religious leaders. He had a hard time here, and let's look at chapter 7. I'm not going to spend much more time on that.
You know, Gerald, I would note that, you know, this kind of sets up that context in John 7 where they sent the guards to get Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't bring Jesus to them. And
Right.
they said, never has a man spoke like this man.
Right.
And then this John 8 text, you have Jesus speaking like no other religious authority does.
Right.
And even though they brought this guilty woman
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah.
And so it's a real contrast.
It is a real contrast. Let's start back. Let's back up. Let's go to chapter 7. Jesus goes to the Feast of Tabernacles. Who knows all about the Feast of Tabernacles? Y'all know what that is? All right. Let me tell you what I know about it. I wish sometimes I had a stronger background of Judaism and understanding all the different things that they did. I'll give you some things that I learned from reading this past week and trying to get ready for this class. There were really 3 festivals that Jesus is working on in these last few chapters. One was the Sabbath. He challenged the Sabbath. Second one, he challenged the Passover. And this one, he's challenging this tabernacle feast. And the feasts that we're talking about here are based on really the seasons, an agricultural cycle. So the first one being at the Passover, it's the beginning of the grain harvest, so it's in the spring. And then Pentecost, which is 7 weeks after that, it's the end of the grain festival, the grain harvest. And then this tabernacle happens after that. It's at the very end of the season, so around in August. It's at the end of the harvest of things that are from trees and vines. So when you think about this whole thing here, all these festivals required the men to travel back to Jerusalem for these festivals and celebration now. At this tabernacle festival, it was more of a farmer deal. So when they came back, all the farmers in the countryside would come back to Jerusalem, and they built temporary shelters to protect the crops. And these shelters were called booths. So sometimes this festival is not called the Tabernacle Festival. Sometimes it's the Festival of Booths.
Booths or
Booths. B-O-O-T-H.
I like that.
How do you say it?
I thought you were saying booze like girlfriend booze.
I didn't say that at all.
Kidding.
And then right after this festival, this Tabernacle Festival, it gets really dry, and it's a drought condition. So part of some of the things they do during this festival, it's really preparing for the dry season and wishing and their prayers for rain and spiritual renewal and all those things are part of this festival. This festival lasted 7 days. It wasn't just a one-time deal. It lasted 7 days. There were lots of sacrifices of bulls and rams and lambs, and day 7 was a special ceremony, and that one there was a lot of things that they did once a day for 6 days, and on that 7th day they would do it 7 times. All right, so you kind of set the stage here that part of this festival, there was at this 7th day, there was something called the water ceremony. The water ceremony. In that, the priests would fill up these golden pitchers as choirs chanted Isaiah 12:3 with joy, the Lord is coming. And they would carry that water up to the top of the temple. And the way I picture it is that they would just pour this water out, and the water would roll down the steps of the temple. So they were really, this was talking about the fact that it's getting ready to be dry, and they were kind of praying that God would send rain and take care of them during this dry season. They would go through the water gate, and as they went through the water gate, these lulavs, they would wave those things, kind of like Jesus when he came into to Jerusalem. They would wave those things as the crowd surrounded, and they were singing. It was a great celebration, and also a plea for rain, plea for spiritual renewal. They also had another ceremony called the light ceremony. There were 4 columns. If you picture in your mind, you've got these 4 columns, and each on top of these columns there were 4 golden bowls filled with oil, and they made the wicks in these big bowls out of garments that the priest had worn out. And when during the ceremony, they would light these bowls that were up on this pedestal, and it was so bright that all Jerusalem was illuminated because of these bowls. So that's kind of what Jesus is walking into in this time. It's right before this tabernacle feast. All right, now I'll kind of set the stage. I hope you get that there's a lot going on with water, and there's a lot going on with light. And Jesus is going to change the meaning of both of those things as he comes into this thing. So in chapter 7, we begin with he's in Galilee, staying there. They want him, everybody's going back to Judea because of this tabernacle feast, and then his brothers in verse 3 said to him, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the miracles you do. No one wants to become a public figure. Act in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world." And then this verse here, "For even his own brothers did not believe in him." If they didn't believe in him, why were they trying to get him to go to Judea? Why do you think? Why would they want him to go to Judea?
Does it have something to do with what it says earlier about in Judea the Jews sought to kill him?
I think, you think they wanted him to go get killed? I don't know. Maybe. It's an interesting thought. I would hate to think that they were wanting him to go so he would get killed.
But it's a matter of truth or dare. You know,
Truth or dare.
You think you're really something right? Well, go show it.
Yeah.
Go prove
Right.
yourself. Demonstrate.
Yeah.
Sibling rivalry.
Maybe some of that. I mean, there's conjecture about what it might have been. I mean, Jesus just got through feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, And I mean, they probably saw some other things that he had done. I just feel like it's a weird thing to say that he didn't believe in him.
This verse 6 says, and Jesus said, "My time is not yet come."
Yeah,
So
So-
it's kind of related to, when his time has come,
yeah,
then he is going to be put to death.
yeah.
So,
Well, he says, "I'm not going." That's basically what he told him.
Then you do.
But then he lets them go, and then Jesus sneaks in to this event, and then there were a lot of people talking about Jesus at this, and so the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders, all the people were talking about it. About halfway through the feast, in verse 14, Jesus goes to the temple courts and begins to teach. And the Jews were amazed at his teaching. How did this man get such learning without having studied? So sometimes when you hear something new, one of your reactions is to say, where does he get off knowing all this stuff? How did he come around knowing this, right? That's one of the questions that we might ask if you hear something new. Now, in their time, it meant something even more. Because if you're going to teach in the temple, you're a rabbi. One of the things that you have to have is you have to have a rabbi that's kind of sponsored you and mentored you and brought you up through the ranks. And I mean, you just didn't walk into the temple and start teaching. You had to have somebody that kind of sponsored you and taught you. You know, they would say, I'm of Apollos, or I'm of, you know, whatever. You know, they would say somebody's name that kind of taught you and brought you up to this. And Jesus didn't have that. So let's read his answer. My teaching is not my own. It comes from him who sent me. If anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. He who speaks on his own does not gain honor for himself. He who speaks on his own does so to gain honor for himself. But he who works for the honor of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? Why are you trying to kill me? So, how did Jesus answer him? Summarize what you think what he said and back to him. How did you get such learning? And what was his answer? It came from God. It came from God. Sure, they loved that, right? But then he says at the end of it, why are you trying to kill me? So how did he get to that? How did Jesus get to that? Did you read it? I don't know if at this point, did we hear? Maybe there was a statement that they wanted to kill him.
It goes back to the first part where he says he didn't go to Judea because they were seeking to kill him.
Yeah.
His brothers then are encouraging him to go openly to Judea.
Mm-hmm.
He says, my time has not yet come. So now but then he does go to Judea to the feast in secret. And then in the process of doing that, he's going into a temple teaching, and then he's being confronted by these leaders.
Yep.
And John also said earlier in his gospel that Jesus didn't commit himself to any man, but he knew what was in their heart.
He knew their heart. I think this, to me, I mean, I think there was evidence, but I also think Jesus knew what they were trying to do. I think he did.
And he did the classic denial.
Yeah.
Most of it, who wants to kill you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to bring that up. So if you got something you don't know, you don't understand, you don't like, then the next human reaction comes from by calling him a name. You are demon possessed. Who's trying to kill you? So if you don't understand it, one of the things to do is try to poke at the person saying it by saying you're demon possessed. Well, that's great. Jesus is demon possessed. Jesus said to them, I did one miracle and you are astonished, yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a child on the Sabbath. Now if a child can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing the whole man on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. So, he's challenging them now on their ability to keep the law of Moses. He's just raised it up another level again to them. So, you guys, you talk about keeping the law, but you don't even know, you're not even keeping the law yourself. So, how are you judging me on your appearances of me? Make a right judgment. Come on. So, next thing.
I think it's interesting, it says, but judge with righteous judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an example of what righteous judgment is later on.
So, yeah, that's make a right judgment. That's difficult sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, and he wants them to stop judging by mere appearances. That's a difficult theme. When I hear that, I think about David. You know, how they marched all of his brothers in there to see who could be the king, and they judged based on appearances, and he was judging based on the heart. I think there's something about how could they make a right judgment? How could they make a right judgment? How do we make a right judgment? How do we make a right judgment? What do you do to make a right judgment?
Pray for help in making it.
Pray. Pray for help. Yeah. Anything else?
Go deeper than just the shadow of this, the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, that's what I see in this whole section of scripture, that you have a judgment made by those who were sent to arrest Jesus.
Yeah.
And they make a deeper judgment. You know, they just didn't act on what they were told to do. They said, man, everybody speak like this guy at all.
Yeah.
And then you have Jesus making this, the Pharisee or scribe made that judgment about that woman. And then Jesus again comes back with a righteous judgment.
Right.
And,
Yeah. I guess, what
they
goes
make a
in,
judgment.
go ahead.
Do you circumcise on the Sabbath day or do you not?
Yeah.
They made a judgment on that.
Yeah, they felt like they could.
Yeah, they don't, yeah,
They made a judgment there.
yeah.
They didn't want anybody healing somebody, physically healing them on the Sabbath. Let's dig into that a little bit more. Come on.
You know, I think, Gerald, when we think about making a judgment, and then let's qualify it by making a right judgment,
Mm-hmm.
it's more than just a sum of one or two things. To be able to make a right judgment, there are many different components that have to be considered before you can come to a conclusion. There have to be facts that are considered, there have to be circumstances, there have to be intent, has to be examined and understood. There has to be what is the legality part of things that you know, and when you look at all of that in context, you know, I think obviously prayer, you know, has to be brought in and seeking God's will, but therein lies a true understanding of God's will. What the Pharisees tended to do was look purely at a legalistic approach. And they did, as you know, as Brock mentioned this morning in his sermon, you know, the legalities had stripped away the love that God had intended in His law.
Right.
And when you do that, you become so myopic on the legalities of things that you forget everything else. You forget circumstances. You forget, you know, the intent. You forget the love that's really, you know, woven throughout God's purpose.
Right.
So I think just getting to a right judgment has to be much broader than just looking at, well, A says it, so it's got to be B, or it's this, so it has to be that, or you did this, so it's got to be that.
Yeah.
We have to stop and really consider a bigger picture than that, but to get to a right judgment.
Yeah. So there were some people in the crowd that believed in Jesus, right? And there were others that did not. And I mean, we'll talk about more of that in a few minutes. But how did they get to a right judgment in Jesus? Mark, let's go back to what you said, and I like what you were talking about. So there were things about them that were different. Maybe. What was different about them? The ones that accepted Jesus, what was different about them?
I think they were looking at things through the heart as opposed to looking at the legalistic view of what the Pharisees around them were trying to see.
Yeah.
You know, they were looking at things through the lens of love.
Yeah.
It appears to me. That's my take on it.
I almost think it's like, okay, so the religious leaders could not accept it. Could not accept it. And the reason was, why?
Not part of their group.
Oh, he wasn't there. He wasn't one of them.
It wasn't one of them, yeah.
But he was a Jew.
He didn't have the lineage, or if you want to.
Well, he was
or the creed.
He was a descendant of Abraham. So he had the lineage.
He wasn't a member of the right tribe, though.
He wasn't part of the tribe of Levi, that's true, right?
Well, we knew that the Messiah wouldn't come from the tribe of Levi, right?
So what they believed about the Messiah, they believed a lot of things. They believed, one, that the Messiah was just going to mysteriously show up one day. That he wasn't going to be a child. They wouldn't know where he came from. That he would just show up. He would just appear. And when he appeared, he would set up his kingdom and everybody would just follow him and do the things that he said. And he would restore their kingdom. You know, there would be people that are outside and there were people that were inside. That was what they thought about the Messiah. So when they go into this debate, which we're just going all over the map talking about this, but when they start this debate with Jesus where he says, I'm the light and I'm the bread and you kind of come to me and all this stuff, he's telling them he's the Messiah. So they come in with these preconceived notions and he doesn't meet any of them. Right? First of all, what about the first one? He said he's just going to appear. Because they say here that at one time they accused him of being from Galilee. You know, that he's a Samaritan. So they call him all these names. You know, if they can't defeat him verbally, they'll try to cast, dispersions on his character and who he's from or where he's from. Where's he from? Everybody knew where he was from. They knew his mom. Right? They knew his mom. So he couldn't be the Messiah. Because I know where he's from. Right? So, but what about, let's go back to the other group. Who believed in Jesus? Who gave the right judgment?
Well, some of them had seen some of the miracles he did.
Well, that's right.
So that was one of the things that led them to believe that he might be the Messiah.
They'd seen the signs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they even asked, if this is the Messiah, when the Messiah comes, is he gonna do more signs than this guy?
Yeah, I can't believe there'll be anybody that would do more than he's doing. Right. So that was a group that believed. Who else? I mean, what else? I think sometimes one of my points in this is it's these people that should have known who Jesus was because they'd studied Moses, they'd studied the law, they'd set up this religious architecture that was very comfortable for them. They liked it. They knew what to expect. And they loved it. And when Jesus came in, he didn't meet any of their expectations. He just blew it all out and challenged them at every turn. He challenged them at every turn. I'm the bread. What? I've got to eat your body? They misunderstood everything about Jesus. And I guess when I read this story in chapter 7 and 8, and I'm thinking about put myself in their shoes. Okay? If I'm a Jew and I'm living in that time, let's just say hypothetically I'm one of the Levite priests. I've been going to the temple, doing the sacrifices. I've been supported by my community. I pray. I read the scrolls. I know them back and forth. I've got all these things that I've done. And Jesus comes in and he's saying that I don't even keep the law of Moses. I don't even keep the law of Moses. How would I react? How would I react? Would I be like, come on in, Jesus, have a seat. Let's just set up a chat and see what all I've been doing wrong.
It seems that maybe Jesus' credibility was in question for them because of that.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be a litmus test for them. Is okay if he follows the law of Moses, then we can maybe have a conversation. But he doesn't. He provides examples of breaking the law of Moses. So
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. You know why the Pharisees looked at it like, no, we don't need to listen to this
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
he fulfilled the law of Moses, but he didn't fulfill their interpretation of the law.
yeah, that's right.
Well, I guess maybe the sermon today made me a little confused in the sense of Jesus had mercy on this woman, but then I was looking at Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and the penalty for adultery is death. So it is confusing. Even now, we understand who Jesus is a little better than the Pharisees. I'm still kind of confused by that.
How he responded to her.
Yeah, because the law says death is
Yeah,
the consequence.
Well, I think Jesus is greater than the law.
he is greater than the law. All right,
The
so,
law's important, but
Yeah.
Jesus
Yeah.
is,
yeah,
is above the law.
so there,
And I don't think the Pharisees
yeah,
could get past that. He spoke truth to power,
right,
and nobody had done that. I mean, the prophets sometimes spoke truth to power, and, you know, there was always that rub there too.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know,
There's also a misuse of the law there.
Well, I was getting ready to talk a little bit more about this. Okay, so part of that law about adultery is that if you see a woman or a man that's getting ready to go do that, your job is to stop them before it happens. All right, so let me just think, how did they trap this person? If they did not know she was getting ready to go do it. I mean, I think when Jesus, and I'm not God, I'm not Jesus, I think he is above this, but I think when he looked at this whole situation, and when he challenged them on the Sabbath, he's looking at this whole thing, and he's saying, you guys aren't keeping the law, and yet you're trying to kill this woman for breaking this one piece of this commandment. You didn't bring the guy. Where's he? Did he just disappear? Or was he one of your buddies? He was probably one of the, the Levite priests, or I don't know who he was. I'm accusing some people I don't know, but I'm just saying,
that'd be
we don't
bad-
know who he was.
That'd be bad kimchi for the Levite priest to be an adulterer.
Well, somehow they trapped this woman, and so they knew she was getting ready to do it. Their job was to stop it, not let it happen, and then go try to do something about it. Yeah, yeah, so, I don't know. I think Jesus looked at this whole situation and was able to see right through it and didn't condemn the woman.
You
All
know,
right.
it was prevalent in that. I mean, you go back to the Old Testament stories. What about Samuel's sons? Why did they even go to church?
Yeah,
They were looking out for the next woman they were gonna get.
Yeah.
You know, besides all the other appetites they were satisfying.
yeah, yeah. So we know there was a lot of evil going on
Yeah.
in that temple, things that they were doing, so. All right,
Power corrupts.
I
So-
think it's still just a little confusing because the Deuteronomy passage was, if a woman is taken advantage of, they say punish both.
mhm,
Unless it was out in the country where she couldn't call for help.
yeah.
And it's just something, I'm just still confused.
Well, to think, so, one of the words that I was thinking about in studying this was the word naive. We're somewhat naive about, and I think we're naive about it today, that if somebody's presented the truth of Jesus, okay, the truth of Jesus, that they're just going to accept it. They're just going to accept it. Why would I say, is that a naive statement? Is that naive to think that? Jimmy says yes. Why, Jimmy?
I think they're, to think somebody is going to accept that immediately would be naive, I think.
Mm.
I think the wiser thing to think is with time, with example, with study, with prayer, with
Yeah.
whatever, over time maybe. But to think that they're gonna
accept it, yeah.
Well, but the flip side to that, we had a great evangelist, Billy Graham, back in the day that would have people accept, Jesus, with an altar call or whatever.
Right.
There were a group of guys that went to assassinate Billy Graham at a revival. And the Lord changed their heart that night
Mm.
before they, while he was there. So, it can happen,
Yeah.
but, we're sometimes a little more questioning.
Yeah.
Because it's a different time too.
Sure. Yeah. People are the same. Right.
I think sometimes, and I agree, I think most people probably do tend to lean that direction of thinking, about naivety and that sort of thing. But I think Jesus' message was we should receive God's word, his word, receive Jesus as if we were a little child.
Yeah.
Without obstruction, without doubt, without encumbrance of circumstances around us in this world.
Yeah.
If Jesus and if God teaches us that, we should accept it.
Yeah.
And that is rooted in faith, in pure faith. If we are able to have faith in Christ, we'll accept what he says without question, without regard of being naive or anything of that ilk. We'll take it for 100% face value.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were some in this circumstance that did that. Even, for example, the guards that were told
Yeah.
to bring Jesus back to the Pharisees. They said, where is he? Why didn't you bring him? They said, well, nobody's really done this kind of stuff before. Nobody talked like him. He's kind of credible here.
Yeah.
I think there was some little childlike faith in them to say, wait, this is different. This is right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a certain amount. Go ahead.
And I think you're speaking to the naive. I know there are people who understand the story of Jesus, who know the Bible, who were raised in the church. When it came time to make that choice, say, am I going to follow this or not? They say no, because they've got excuses and reasons for it. But just because somebody knows the story of Jesus, just because they've heard it, that doesn't mean they're going to accept it.
Right.
I got people in my extended family today, they're my age, who know the truth
Yeah.
and refuse to accept it.
I know. Yeah, me too. I think the naive part is this, that when Jesus spoke the truth, they didn't react very well to him, did they? What makes us think that when we speak the truth about something that God says, that people are going to react any differently? That's the naive part that I'm talking about. Is that Jesus was telling these people the truth. The truth about him, the truth about God, the truth about who they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to worship. And when he communicated that to them, there were lots of reactions. There were some that believed. Okay, we talked a little bit about them. I think the people that were more readily able to believe Jesus had zero background in religion. They had zero background. They were just living life. When they heard the message, they accepted. The people that were steeped in religion, the leaders of the church or the temple, had the hardest problem because they had so much to get off, so much baggage. They had laid all this stuff on their backs. When Jesus comes in and says, I want you to love people, and that's what this is all about. Let's think about this. The covenant with Abraham. What was it?
Thank you, Father.
Great nation, and that through your all nations would be blessed. All nations. All right. What had that become? Were the Jews trying to worry about all nations being blessed?
Then,
It became a religion of exclusivity. It's just for me. It's just for my Jewish brothers. I've got no interest in anybody else. You guys, everybody outside of that, if you're not a descendant of Abraham, if you're not a Jew, you don't have any part in this. Okay? So Jesus comes in and says, that's not the religion, that's not the covenant I made with you guys. It's not about your birthright. It's not about your legacy or your heritage. It's about faith. Abraham was saved by faith, right? He was saved by faith, and that is the kingdom that God was talking about, and that's what Jesus is talking about with these guys. You guys got it all wrong. You guys got it all wrong. It doesn't matter who your daddy is. My dad, God, my Father in heaven is who I'm telling you about. And you need to pay attention to that. Forget this other stuff. All this other stuff that you've kind of claiming that's saving you is not going to save you.
You know, Gerald, be a little sympathetic for those folks a little bit. If you were back in and you're marked different, you're circumcised.
Yeah.
And then number two, God's been real, again, his motive was to keep a pure line so that he could prove he fulfills his promise.
Yeah.
But then you're told, hey, you don't marry those other folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and then when you have Ezra and Nehemiah story, making people break marriages because you married those
Right.
other, I mean, you can certainly see where, well, they certainly would open the door to think, man, we must be better than, and they haven't got anything to do with us. You know, back you have Ezra's telling those other folks that were there, we're building this wall and temple, and you don't have anything to do with this. You don't belong with this.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's motives and everything else in that story. But I mean, when you just start adding all that up, you
Yeah.
can certainly
Kind of see.
empathize a little bit
Yeah,
with the
I
fact why
empathize.
they thought they were so
Yeah.
arrogant or what they.
Well, first of all, I'm sitting there thinking, my empathy is not necessarily, I do empathize with them because I kind of, if you've been your whole life doing this one thing and it changes everything. But my worry and my concern is that I don't create the same attitude about religion that they have. I want to be open to what God's doing. And my faith and my salvation is not based on anything other than Jesus. Okay? So we got to be careful that we don't just replace one religious institution with another. That's not what Jesus wants. He wants your heart. He wants you to eat his bread, drink his water, be filled with his spirit. And that's different than, that's the message of this whole couple of chapters here. And that's the reason I'm loving this study, because it's trying to make me think about, okay, who am I and what is my faith in? And am I right about everything? No. But I'm right about one thing, and that is that you love Jesus, right? And you're following him, okay? All right, I feel like I preached a sermon. I didn't mean to, but what else was I supposed to talk about today?
So can you go back,
Wait just a minute. Can I ask about one more thing? Religious security. Religious security. What does that term mean to you? What is religious security?
Secure in your religious beliefs, but as you study more and as you grow and mature more, I hope our religious beliefs change, because I know there's some things Church of Christ believed many years ago that most of us hopefully still don't believe.
Yeah. Well, I know we have a good habit of throwing Church of Christ around, but every religion, every church has a group of beliefs that they hang on to, just like we do. So I don't want to criticize us by ourselves. I think everybody has that, okay? You know, so
This is just the only one I know of.
this is the one you know about, it's the one I know about too, so but I've learned from talking to others, people that have different traditions, that they have their own set of religious things that they hold on to. I guess my thing about this religious security, what is your religious security? What is your security? What is your security? What creates you? You know, is it, we talk about being in life. I have a great retirement, so I'm secure. Or I have a great job, so I'm secure. What about your soul? What's your religious security?
Jesus died for our sins.
It's Jesus, right?
I know it's just hard to believe that somebody had to create or make what we're in, and if you, I just think that the security would be that knowing that somebody's there, that there's something for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to believe that people can go through life and just think that there's
Yeah.
nothing there for them.
Yeah.
I guess, that'd be my religious security is that believing in God, believing in Jesus, and knowing that He's there on scene at some point in time.
That's right. That's the pure faith, right?
So
All right, Rick, go ahead. You got something?
Well, yeah, I think religious security in the sense that our God the Father created a kingdom by which we can come to Him wholly and be forgiven, whereas before we could not.
What about all this other stuff, Rick?
Doesn't matter. So as we were going through this, you touched on a lot of things. How do we read the Bible? Well, one of the things, because of some of the politics and some of the diversity in beliefs, not just in Churches of Christ, but across Christendom, I haven't learned anything at all. What I have learned is I need to come to Scriptures with a clean slate, and to try to pull out of it what about this can help me grow and to share Christ. Okay? And so that has opened my mind more to being broader in the sense of who my brother is. In the beginning, it was very restrictive. Now it's much broader.